I'm Wesley Rose of D&DMC, your Dungeon Master of Ceremonies, for this class on creating a character for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I assume if you're watching this class that you already know what a role-playing game is, but in brief, it is playing pretend with rules. Players will create a character, fill out a character sheet describing what that character is capable of. Another player, the Dungeon Master, will present them a scenario and run them through a story, describing each setting and new discovery and what each place looks like and smells like and what they hear and see there. The players will then announce their reaction to this, or how they would like to accomplish tasks or solve puzzles, at which point the Dungeon Master will have them roll dice, add numbers from their character sheet, and tell them if the resulting number was a success. Before you create a character for Dungeons & Dragons, it is important to read the book and look for hooks. What I mean by that is you need to make sure you have a surface level knowledge of the game and the rules. I will not have time in this lesson to teach you how to play D&D. I will be teaching you what you should consider when making a character to make sure you make an effective one. But looking for hooks is the best reason to read through the player's handbook in Dungeons & Dragons. It just the imagery and the stories and the things in there will certainly excite your imagination and give you some fantastic character ideas. You can also draw your character ideas from whatever fiction you're consuming right now. Even if it's books, television, or movies, it can be really easy to take a character from your favorite TV show and put them in the Dungeons & Dragons world. You already have an idea of how this person acts or reacts and interacts with other people. If you're looking for some excellent Dungeons & Dragons fiction for character inspiration, I would recommend Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore, two fantastic novels set in the Dungeons & Dragons world. Before making a character, it's important to remember that this is not a competition. You do not need to make the best character and beat the Dungeon Master and outshine your party members. No one's going to like you if you approach it this way. You win Dungeons & Dragons when everyone has fun. This is collaborative storytelling, not a competitive board game. Before you get started, you should know your race and your class combination. This makes the character creation process smooth and easy if you have this in mind before you get started. When choosing your race and class combination, there are conventional and unconventional choices. Every class benefits from different attributes, and every race has bonuses to different attributes. The fighter class obviously uses their strength often. So it's easy to pick a dwarf or a half-orc, two races that have bonuses to their strength, to be the fighter. As you've played the game more, it can be very fun to make unconventional combinations and make a half-orc wizard or a gnome barbarian, and these can be effective characters. However, if this is your first time, I strongly encourage you to pick a class and a race combination that benefit each other, that conventional choice. It is often easiest to start by choosing your class. You may, however, be reading through the book and thumb past the tiefling or the half-orc and decide that you have to be that race, and then choose your class based on that. Wherever you draw your inspiration from is fine. It is easiest to think of in order to make class selection easier, I have broken each of the classes up into 4 categories. If a party has one of each of these categories in their group, they will be well-rounded and not have any obvious weaknesses. The first role is the tank role. These are the classes that are strong, beefy, and will hold the line. They are the front line against the monsters. They hold the hordes back from reaching the squishy, vulnerable party members like the wizard. This is the fighter, the barbarian, and the paladin. All classes that gain strong benefits to defense and can just stay in the fight longest. The next role is damage. These are the classes that are able to deal large amounts of damage to a single target. The rogue and the monk do this up close in melee combat. The warlock and the ranger do this from a distance. This class is very important when you come into those big battles against, say, a dragon. Someone needs to be able to put large amounts of and consistent amounts of damage on that big monster. The third role you want to see is support. These are your healers and classes that enhance their allies. This is the cleric, the druid, and the bard. Each classes that have healing magic, that have buffs and benefits for their allies, or removing negative effects or stopping offensive magic from coming in. They will keep everyone alive, and in the fight, you want to support. The fourth role is the crowd control, and this is done best by the wizard and the sorcerer. This role deals with large numbers of monsters, or generally controls the fight, controls the area. This can be done simply by throwing lightning bolts and fireballs to suppress a large crowd of goblins, or it can take the form of illusionary magic or enchantment, creating an imaginary pit in front of the goblins so they refuse to charge at the party, or casting enchantment and charming half of the goblin horde, turning them against each other. In any case, the crowd control suppresses the enemy. You need a tank to hold the front line, you need a damage to drop the big bad guys, you need a support to make sure everyone stays in the fight, and you need a crowd control to suppress the enemies. Now, personally, I have been recently watching The Witcher, and I really liked the idea of a bard traveling town to town trying to gain fame as a singer and songwriter. So I really want to play a bard, and in thumbing through the book, I see a lot of images of halflings drinking, dancing, playing music, and general revelry. So I think I want my bard to be a halfling. So let's get started on making our halfling bard. The first thing you want to remember is use pencil. I will be using an erasable pen, but you will be erasing many of these things throughout your game. As you gain experience, as you take damage and lose health and heal it back, as you level up and add things to your character, all of this information will change. In fact, I truly recommend most players have a separate piece of paper or notebook to track a number of things that may change frequently. So, we know that we are making a bard, and we know that he is level 1. And we know that he's going to be a halfling. And I've decided to name him Kebis Padfeet. Now, begin on page 13. We'll begin by assigning his attributes. Now, on page 13, you can see that you have an attribute score that we will be assigning, and each of those attribute scores has a corresponding modifier or bonus that will affect dice rolls. There are 3 different ways you can apply attributes to your character. One is entirely random, and I do not recommend it. You are just rolling dice, and it honestly leads to a lot of bad characters or cheating. The way I recommend often for first-time players is to use this standard array that you see towards the top of page 13 that gives you some preset attribute numbers to assign wherever you like, and it's a pretty good spread. You may also use this ability score point detailed at the bottom of page 13. Now, for our bard, I am going to be using this standard array. Strength is something that a bard is probably not going to use. It's a measure of obviously how strong and how hard they can hit, how much they can carry. So I'm going to make that the lowest attribute on our bard. Next, dexterity. I do feel like a halfling ought to be pretty dexterous. Now I know that a halfling is going to end up getting a +2 bonus to dexterity. So I think that I am going to give him a dexterity of 12, knowing that I will get +2, moving me up in my ultimate bonus point. Moving 12 to 13 is +1, 14 to 15 is +2. Constitution I don't think is going to be particularly important. That is a measure of how tough you are. I don't think my bard Kevis is going to be very tough. Intelligent, I think that is pretty important. I think I am going to go ahead and make that a 14. I want my bard to be witty, intelligent, and knowledgeable. And wisdom, I also would like my bard to be wise. Wisdom is also linked to the very important skill perception. So we'll go ahead and put the 13 there and the 15 on charisma. Now that we've assigned our attributes, before we fill in this little area here, which will be the bonuses, we turn to the race. The halfling, in this case, and we want to find the halfling traits here. The first thing we do is add the ability score, which is a +2 to dex. Going down the line, we pick his alignment. You should definitely read this section of the book for more information. I think that Kevis is going to be chaotic good. His speed is 25, that it means 25 feet. And he has traits. Now I tend to just list the traits over here, and instead of copying all of the rules regarding the trait, I'll leave a little note for myself so I remember and put the page number so that I can reference it later. All of these traits are going to be on page 28. All right. Oh, one more. All right. Move on to languages. Halflings get common and halfling. Are there 2 languages? I put my languages and proficiencies down in this bottom corner. And lastly, we choose the sub-race for halfling. The Lightfoot gets a bonus to charisma, definitely something we want on our bard who will use charisma a lot. So we will get an ability score increase to charisma and add the naturally stealthy trait, which I have already done. So now, before we turn to the Bard class, that's the end of the attribute bonuses we will get. We've added all our attributes from the race. So now we can add up the bonuses. Again, that is found on page 13. And just check the score here, and then put the modifier in the box below. And there we are. Next we turn to the class page, so that would be the Bard. Now we find the class features, and we begin with hit points. So at first level, the Bard has hit points equal to 8 plus their Constitution modifier. So 8. I then write down the proficiencies, which are going to be light armor, a list of weapons they can use, and in this case, 3 musical instruments of my choice. Go ahead and going to write those proficiencies down here in this bottom corner. So for my 3 instruments, I decided a lute, a flute, and a harp. And you can, on something like instruments, you can start being creative and adding to your character and choosing any instrument that may have been around in Renaissance or medieval world. Next is the saving throws that you are proficient at. Saving throws are found here. You will be asked to make a saving throw when you are resisting an attack or an effect. If you are struck by a fireball, you'll have to make a dexterity saving throw which would allow you to cut the damage in half. That would represent your a character dodging or hitting the ground, or a constitution saving throw to resist the effects of a poison. So the bard is proficient in dexterity and charisma saves. At level 1, everyone's proficiency bonus is +2. Anytime that you're proficient in something, you will be adding this bonus to it. So now we can fill out the saving throws by just taking the modifiers and moving them over, except in the case of dexterity, we will be adding the proficiency bonus since we are proficient in it. So, if our bard is called to resist something with charisma, make a charisma saving throw, likely to resist the effects of a charm or enchantment, they have quite a big bonus. They will roll a dice and add 5. Next, we choose our skill proficiencies. And for the bard, fortunately, you may choose any 3. Now, I think for this instance, because I know that down the line, when I choose my background is going to be entertainer, which comes with proficiency in performance. So that may seem like an obvious choice now for the singer, but I'm going to save that and get that proficiency from my background, something we'll discuss in a moment. But for this bard, I think I want him to be skilled at investigation. I want him to be able to Sherlock Holmes his way through things. I want him to be skilled at persuasion. I have a high charisma to begin with, so it would behoove me to lean into that. And for my third one, I think I will take history. I would like my bard to be knowledgeable in history. So we now go through and apply all of these bonuses, again, similarly to how we applied the bonuses for the saving throws. If we're proficient in it, we're going to add the attribute, which is listed next to it, in this case, intelligence, +1, plus the proficiency bonus, giving us +3 to history. We go ahead and fill that out now. Got all our skills filled out. You'll need to read the rules in the book to get a good idea of what the skills do, although I think a lot of them are very self-explanatory. Next, we're going to move down here and make some choices on equipment. It gives you a handful of A, B, or C, or A, B choices on what you would like for equipment. I think for this halfling bard, I think I want a rapier. I like the idea of this halfling running around with a fancy fencing sword. And he's an entertainer, so we're going to take an entertainer's pack. And I definitely want a lute. It's the coolest of the instruments. And we put all of that equipment right here. This is different from the proficiencies. Proficiencies simply tells us which items and equipment we can apply this proficiency bonus to when using. The equipment is going to be what we actually have. All right. Now that we know it, we can reference our equipment in the back to get our statistics for our attack rolls. On page 149, you can find the weapons. We're just going to plug in the information here. Rapier. Now, the attack bonus here is the linked attribute, which rapier is a finesse weapon. So we know that we can use our dexterity instead of our strength, which is good for our little halfling. So we're going to add the dexterity bonus plus the proficiency bonus. So he gets a +4 to attacks. The rapier does 1d8 piercing damage. And we'll always add the attribute bonus to the damage as well, but not the proficiency bonus. Turn a couple pages back to page 145 and look at our armor. We got leather armor. So our armor class is going to be 11 plus our dexterity modifier. So 13. Do keep in mind that some of the heavier armors limit or don't give you any of that dexterity bonus at all. So if you have a lot of dexterity, you're actually more protected if you take lighter armor. Now that we've gone through that portion of the class, we turn back to the bard and we move on to spell casting. This, I strongly encourage everyone to closely read the spellcasting information for their class because it is different for every class. The spell slots you have available change based on your level, but also your class, and the spells that you know is different for every class. Wizards copy spells into a spell book. Sorcerers have a small but ever-changing list of spells they have access to. Every magic-using class memorizes and uses spells a little differently, so you need to read that part very carefully. Bard is pretty simple. They know 4 spells, they can cast they know 2 cantrips, and at first level, they can cast 2 first-level spells per day. So, we'll get my handy spell list here, and I will turn to the magic section. The list of spells begins on page 207. For this bard, I am going to, for my cantrips, which can be cast any number of times throughout the day, I am going to take Vicious Mockery and Minor Illusion. These will both be very supportive spells. Minor Illusion is, I feel like benefits him as an entertainer, and Vicious Mockery is useful in a fight. So I get 4 spells, and I'm only going to be able to cast first level spells. So I think I am going to take Detect Magic, Cure Wounds, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and Thunderwave. Detect Magic will be helpful to the party as we encounter problems or puzzles. Cure Wounds will be supportive in, obviously keeping people alive and healing damage. Tasha's Hideous Laughter debilitates enemies, again being supportive. And then Thunderwave is just an area of effect damage spell. So I wanted my bard to be able to throw some damage out with his magic. Write these down. And obviously you'll need to read the description of these spells so you know what you want, but they're listed alphabetically, just a few pages on. So we turn back to our bard. And we move on to spell save DC and spell attack modifier. For spell save DC, well, first of all, our spell casting ability is Charisma. That is the ability that bards use to cast their magic. Our spell save DC is 8 plus the proficiency bonus plus our Charisma modifier. So we know that adds up to 13. This is one of the more difficult concepts for people when they're starting. When you cast magic, often your effect just happens and it is incumbent upon the target to resist it. So if you were to cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter on a group of people to make them double over laughing and remove them from combat, the effects of the spell occur and they have to roll a charisma check, a saving throw, and get at least a 13 or suffer the effects from the spell. Because you spend so much time rolling dice as soon as you make an action, it feels like you should be rolling dice when you cast these spells, but often you do not have to. You will cast the spell, its effects occur, and it is incumbent upon the dungeon master to roll saving throws to see if the creatures resist it. Although some spells are attack spells, we do not have any. They're usually cantrips or things like fireballs or lightning bolts, but when we do have attack spells, it will be our proficiency bonus plus our charisma modifier, much like the attack bonus on an item. And we know that will be +5. Personally, I tend to keep all my spells in a separate piece of paper, but I still note my spell attack info here on this front page. Just for convenience. Now we're nearly done, and we just have to polish them off with a background. The background can be really useful in helping you flesh out the character and their personality and how they will act. Personality and background. This portion gives you a lot of height and weight ranges for different races, just to flesh that character out even further. It also gives a nice list of languages here. But we are most interested, beginning on page 127, the backgrounds. And these give you a few skill bonuses that you don't want to miss out on. So you definitely want to choose one, and they're really useful for fleshing out that character and just putting those finishing touches. We are, of course, going to go with an entertainer. Found on page 130. So we get to add 2 more skill proficiencies, in this case acrobatics and performance, and we'll want to go ahead and add that proficiency bonus now. A couple tool proficiencies that we're going to add over here. And it says we get a new musical instrument. Think hard on that. I think it's just going to be a drum. And the last bit, and this is a nice little flavor, is a favor of an admirer, a love letter, a lock of hair, or a trinket. I think this bard has a locket from an adoring fan. Now, these things you can add the personality traits, the ideals, the bonds, the flaws. You can roll on this chart and get a random one. You can choose one of these, or you can literally make anything up. These are really here to give you an idea an example of what they mean by a personality trait, an ideal, a bond, and a flaw. But these will help you flesh that character out, make them more real, give you a better idea of who they are and how they would react to the scenarios, and also giving your dungeon master a very good idea of who this character is and how he can weave their backstory into his story. That does complete the statistics that we really need to get started. So now we've finished our character and we're ready to get started. But first we need to talk about table etiquette. The first and most important one is respecting each other. You are not the main character. You are not at the center of this story. This is a collaborative storytelling game. Don't force your ideas on another player. You certainly never tell another player what their character does. Only they do that. Disagreements do come up in D&D, and it's some of the most fun when you encounter a scenario like coming across a little camp full of goblins. If you have a barbarian in the party or a paladin, they immediately want to just charge in and start swinging their sword. That's what their class would do. However, you may have a rogue and a ranger in the party that would much rather lay an ambush, draw a few of the goblins out and take them out one by one very carefully. And you may have an extreme in your party like the druid who would view these goblins as just a natural part of the world and the forest, and them existing is just part of the natural order, and why on earth would we attack these goblins? These disagreements are the spice of the game and shouldn't be shied away from, but don't be that player that really bullies your point of view and forces the party along with you. Also, don't be the player that splits up because that you can't get people to ascribe to your plan. Avoid splitting the party at almost all costs. You are at your best when you are all together. If you have chosen a party that covers each of the 4 roles, the tank, the damage, the support, or the crowd control, then you're covering for each other's weaknesses and enhancing each other's strengths. You are at full power when you are together. And a word of advice, if for some reason your party does split up, always follow the healer. They will keep you alive. That rogue that went off on his side mission, he's likely to die and have to make a new character. Stick with the healer. As you're playing, pay attention. Take notes. That doesn't mean you need to write a novel or write a diary of your adventures, but jot down that NPC's name that you met and where you met them. If you find a few strange items that may not seem particularly important, still write it down. You have no idea. The Dungeon Master may have just given you the key to the puzzle 2 sessions from now. Write it down if you have it. Know what you're going to do before it is your turn to do something. One of the most frustrating things you can do as a player is to be on your phone or generally not paying attention, particularly during combat. It will take up the lion's share of the session often. And if you don't know what has occurred, everyone's going to have to explain it to you. Say, well, since you last took your turn, these guys moved over here, this player did this, and then you make a smart decision and go back to your phone where everyone has to tell you the story of what has occurred since you were last paying attention again before you make your next decision. It will add so much time to the session and frustrate your players and your DM. Keep your table talk to a minimum. This is an extremely long game, and you are playing it with your friends. You are going to joke around. You are going to tell stories and talk about what's going on in your lives. That's very natural. Make an effort to keep that to a minimum, because Dungeons and Dragons can stretch long into the night, and you will shave hours off of a play session just by keeping that table talk down. Always show your dice rolls. Roll your dice in a common area where everyone can see, and it avoids the appearance of impropriety, the appearance of cheating, and just heads off all those problems before they can become one. Roll your dice where everyone can see, unless you're the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is not required to show you his dice roll. The Dungeon Master has the final say. Even if you rolled a 20 If he says you did not lasso that dragon and ride it Daenerys Targaryen style through the city, you didn't do it. It wasn't successful. Don't argue with him. Being a dungeon master requires an enormous amount of work. They've written a story. They have poured so much of themselves into these sessions. Show them some respect. Listen to them when they're talking, and don't argue. I hope you have everything you now need to make a character that you can really love and really enjoy. Thank you all, and have a great, great game.